When the Titanic sank on April 15, 1912, everyone used the same word: tragedy. 1,500 people lost their lives. The ship that was called unsinkable went to the bottom of the ocean on its very first voyage. But there was something that wasn't talked about much in those days. A reality underlined in most history books and then quickly passed over. The Titanic was not just a disaster. It was also a business event. Money changed hands. Shares fell, then other shares rose. Some companies lost, but some quietly profited. And a question comes to mind. Who actually benefited from this disaster? Because in history, behind almost every great loss, there is an invisible gain. To understand this, we need to go back a little. The company operating Titanic was White Star Line, a British shipping firm. But White Star wasn't alone. It was actually part of a much bigger structure. Do you know who stood behind it? J.P. Morgan. Perhaps the most powerful banker in the world at that time. Morgan had a big dream: to control transatlantic shipping under a single hand. He bought companies, merged them, and built a massive trust. The International Mercantile Marine Company, IMM. White Star was the jewel of this empire. Titanic was the most expensive product in the display window. That's why the sinking of the ship didn't just mean people died. It also meant a financial shock worth millions of dollars. When the news spread, panic hit the stock market. IMM shares fell. Lawsuits were filed. Families demanded compensation. Insurance companies started calculating what they were about to face. But here's where something interesting happens. IMM wasn't actually in great shape even before the Titanic. It was in debt. Morgan's system had grown too big. And competition with its biggest rival, Cunard, was becoming increasingly fierce. Strangely enough, the Titanic disaster gave IMM an excuse. An excuse to restructure. An excuse to put its debts on the table. An excuse to ask for understanding from the public and the government. In other words, the disaster gave Morgan the opportunity to reset the board. Now let's look at insurance. The Titanic was insured for about $1 million. Roughly $120 million in today's money. Lloyd's of London and many smaller insurers paid this amount. Some couldn't carry the burden. Some went bankrupt. But the big players survived. They even grew stronger. Because the weak were eliminated, the market was left with fewer players. In finance, something that looks like a loss can turn into a long-term gain. So what did the media do? It exploded. Newspapers printed extra editions. People wanted to read every detail. The New York Times sold issue after issue, gained prestige, and grew. Titanic became the biggest-selling news story since the assassination of McKinley. So yes, the disaster fed the newspapers too. But it didn't end there. Survivors wrote memoirs. Books were published. Conferences were held. Exhibitions were opened. Theaters put the sinking on stage. Titanic very quickly turned into a product. Already in 1912. Long before James Cameron. And what about the rival Cunard? White Star's disaster gave Cunard an advantage. Their ships were perceived as safer. Passengers voted with their wallets. One company's loss became another's gain. Even shipbuilders benefited from this. Harland and Wolff, who built Titanic, were criticized at first. But then what happened? New safety laws were introduced. More lifeboats became mandatory. Stronger designs were demanded. And what did that mean? New contracts. New jobs. New profits. Safety suddenly became profitable. Here lies the big truth. Disasters do not destroy money. They redistribute it. Some lose. Some grow stronger. And some quietly get rich. It's no different today. Who benefited after Katrina? Who picked up cheap assets after the 2008 crisis? Who grew during the pandemic, and who collapsed? The pattern is always the same. Titanic is not just a story from the past. It's a template. If you can't see this template, you can't see where the money is flowing either. Because capital does not die. It just finds a new ship. This is a bitter truth. But it is the truth. Tragedy is real. Human suffering is real. But the system that turns disaster into opportunity is also real. And understanding this protects you from being deceived. Because whether it's Titanic, a crisis, or a pandemic, the same question always lingers in the background. While everyone is sinking, who is swimming? History does not repeat itself. But it rhymes. And if you don't learn to hear those rhymes, you will be surprised every time. If this perspective gave you something new, subscribe. History gives answers, as long as you ask the right questions.